Hello all, Rick here, covering the state of the Trek galaxy in the wake of the Dominion War, beginning with where it ended. The Treaty of Bajor was the signing accords that created terms over the ending of the Dominion War. It covered a variety of topics that all signing parties would have to adhere to, or risk it igniting a new conflict. These terms heavily favoured the Alpha Quadrant, which is just as well, as it was the Dominion that was the invading force, acting to secure itself against a threat that did not actually exist. Among these terms were that the Dominion, military personnel, ships or equipment, were to completely withdraw from the Alpha Quadrant within 26 hours or 1 Bajoran day of signing, and all the territory that the Dominion and its allies had claimed was to be relinquished back to Alpha Quadrant powers. This would involve further discussions among the Alpha Quadrant powers, as places like Beta Z had been occupied and needed to be returned to their original sovereign powers, especially in places like Benzar, which was a Federation world but was liberated from Dominion control by the Romulan Star Empire, who historically never relinquished a territory it had claimed in the past. However, the treaty would go on to cite a pre-war status, with an exact stardate as the initial starting point for the restoration of borders and territory. Plus, Benzar was a Federation member and unlikely to be tolerated as a Romulan Star Empire vassal state. One concession, however, was that the Cardassian losses to the Klingon Empire were to be maintained, so the Cardassian Union was ultimately diminished by the war. The signing parties were the United Federation of Planets, the Klingon Empire, the Romulan Star Empire, the Bajoran Republic, the Cardassian Union, and the Breen Confederacy, and the founders of the Dominion. Following on from this treaty, the Dominion War Accords were written up that clarified and dealt with issues more specifically including relations and aid that the United Federation of Planets would then provide to the Cardassian Union in recovery from the Dominion's attempted genocide. The founders signed this accord, primarily because not only had they lost, but they were on the verge of dying out from a Section 31 virus, and the whole point of the Dominion even existing was to protect the founders through fear and complete control. The founders were the Dominion, their Vorta and jem'hadar artificially manufactured to preserve their will alone. So there was little compunction about calling off the whole thing when the lives of the changelings were on the line. There were two more conditions, however: that the female changeling, the face of the Dominion War in the Alpha Quadrant and operations leader, was to surrender herself to the Federation for trial and war crimes. This is a bigger sacrifice for the Dominion, as to exist away from the Great Link, their home, from an extended time is a horrid fate, yet they are nigh immortal in lifespan. Returning in her stead would be Constable Odo, delivering the cure to his people, although this was never written into the treaty, just on his word of honour to a fellow changeling. Which I want to point out as important, because to the Dominion founders the treaty was a scrap of paper to placate the Alpha Quadrant. The real negotiation was carried out through a few seconds of linked conversation between two of the Dominion's gods, and fulfilled on trust. The word of a changeling, even an enemy, was worth more to them than all the treaties of the Solids. So what followed? Well, the United Federation of Planets got back on track with new exploration initiatives, resuming work on ships like the Lunar class and drawing up new ship designs. Shortly after, the USS Voyager returned home from the Alpha Quadrant, bringing with it a trove of Delta Quadrant technologies and data to be poured over, giving Starfleet a whole new lease on life and a much-needed motivation to put the war behind them. We saw the explosion of new drive technologies like the Protostar and Slipstream drives, the latter seeming to catch on faster and incorporated on ships like the Dauntless, Pathfinder and Odyssey later on. The next big issue to tackle for the UFP was the Romulan crisis, and for this Utopia Planitia was repurposed to make ships for this effort, while a series of synthetic, non-sentient workers were created to accelerate the process. Of course, this all came apart when the Tal Shiar turned this against them and annihilated their Starfleet rescue fleet. The end result of this was that although Starfleet would continue its exploratory missions, it would increase security and maintain the fleet of ships generated in the Dominion War, because it had no idea where the attack had come from, and would not know for another 14 years. Some even suspected it the precursor to a Dominion attack again. Paranoia would eventually fade, but the result was plenty of bad blood from the Romulans, mixed with those who at least appreciated the Federation's efforts before the supernova. The Breen continued to be a problem, however, such as in 2381 when they made incursions into Brekka, a non-Federation world, but they did fire upon a Starfleet away team with intent to keep their invasion a secret. The one thing that is still a little hazy is the status of Bajor. Its application to join the Federation was still available to be pursued, and some tales, both in books and in games, have this occur at different times, but it does happen, a little later in online. However, it is expressed in the shows that Bajor is concerned about trading away its sovereignty, considering the Cardassians had previously stolen it. While the UFP is far from the Cardassian Union and has earned Bajor's trust as an ally, Bajor might simply feel uncomfortable with anyone overseeing aspects of its governance, at least for a while. In terms of position, they also have little need to join. The Starfleet will continue to protect the wormhole and, by extension, DS9 and Bajor, because they benefit from it, while Bajor itself is in a position to dictate who gets access to it and trade within its borders. But what of the Dominion? Well, there is not actually a lot to say in the canon of the shows, and that's kind of a good thing because it meant that they were abiding by their treaty. To clarify, the treaty specified no military equipment or personnel step foot in the Alpha Quadrant, but trade, ambassadorial ships and the like would be permitted. However, it sounds like nothing there was accomplished here either. In the extra-canonical stories, the UFP had occasionally reached out to the Dominion in regards to information on topics and the like, but was either ignored or received a curt reply. Within the Dominion, however, the Founders were undergoing, well, let's call it discussions. Odo was attempting to bring his knowledge of the compassionate sides of solids to his people and would argue for a softer approach. Because of the nature of the Great Link, my terminology is insufficient to convey what was going on. There is no literal dialogue or discussion, more like a dissemination of Odo's experiences into his people. Well, this was not an opinion shared by all within the Link, however. Some would hold to their original ideals, that they were only safe through control, through dominion. Plus, they had made many enemies over its 2,000-year life, and it's not like the Dominion could suddenly turn the other cheek and become a benevolent force in the Gamma Quadrant, well, that would be inviting reprisal. There are several times in Apocrypha, however, where echoes of the Dominion resurfaced. For example, the 2,800 Dominion warships that the Prophets of the Wormhole deleted, well, they were actually sent forwards in time to the year 2409. This saw the fleet re-emerge, thinking no time had passed, and beginning their confused attack on DS9, but to their credit at least, the misunderstanding was quickly realised. However, the Vorta in command had trouble convincing the jem'hadar first to cease, and a founder was required. The Starfleet opted to release the female shapeshifter in return for her calling off the attack in person, and they all returned to the Gamma Quadrant. In this instance, a second Dominion war was averted. Additionally, there is the existence of a second, smaller Great Link established by Laas. He had travelled around searching out wayward shapeshifters of the 200 infants that the Link had sent out like Odo, and gathered those he found forming his own society on Orius, which was in the Alpha Quadrant. Again, this violates no treaties, as they were not Dominion, but a whole new faction who had never been to the Dominion at all. In canon, these 200 are probably still at large, but it would be cool to see their tale evolve in this direction. However, if, say, a faction of changelings were to consider their opinions irreconcilable with a new, less aggressive Dominion stance, well then they may leave on their own to resume their war on the Federation, however without the resources of their fleets. There would be many justifications for such an action. After all, it was Starfleet's Section 31 that poisoned the Link with a biological weapon, and we have already established what little regard the Dominion has for treaties themselves, only the safety of the Founders. Such a splinter ideology might lead to a renegade faction, and that would be a more difficult thing to explain, especially if they undertook attacks on the Federation. But, for the most part, the Dominion had continued to maintain its, well, Dominion over the Gamma Quadrant, and presumably is making very slow but gradual changes to how it runs things. It has abided by the Treaty of Bajor and the Dominion War Accords, not because it respects the Federation, but because it maintains the safety of its people, and Odo's life might have softened them somewhat. Although not all agreed, even when the Federation was in disarray from the synth attack, the Dominion did not invade, and we even see that the Federation is allowed to operate in a limited fashion inside the Gamma Quadrant, presumably outside of Dominion territory. This is about all I have so far on post-Dominion War Star Trek, and the future for all parties remains to be developed. So thanks for watching, I've been Rick, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.